The orc woman standing in the third row of the hop garden had worked through worse pain than the ache in her shoulders, and she would work through this too, because stopping meant losing the day's wages, and losing wages meant her son went hungry. Erya Oakes had learned that lesson in the hardest school there was, the one that taught by taking things away until you understood that no one would give them back out of kindness. The baby on her back had finally stopped crying. His small fists knotted in the leather straps that held him against her spine, and she picked faster now that both hands were free to strip the hop flowers into her sack without pausing to bounce or soothe. Around her, the other pickers worked in silence broken only by the rustle of vines and the occasional cough. 40 people in the garden, and not one had offered to hold Ruvan while he screamed himself into exhaustion. Not the women with babies of their own. Not the old grandmother who hummed lullabies while she worked. Not the young girls who cooed over every infant they passed in the village square. An orc child did not merit that kind of tenderness, and an orc woman did not merit that kind of help. And Erya had stopped expecting either 3 years ago when her mate Gorvak died under a rockslide in the quarry, and she learned exactly how much a promise was worth when the man who made it was dead. His brothers had come for Ruvan the day after the burial rites. They said a boy needed men to raise him, that a woman alone could not teach him what he needed to know, that it was their duty and their right under old orc custom to take him into their lodge. What they meant was that Gorvak's share of the quarry wages would go to them if the child was in their house, and that a half-blood child with a human grandmother was an embarrassment they would rather raise out of sight. Erya had told them no. She had barred the door and kept a knife in her belt for 6 weeks, until they stopped coming around. And then she had left the quarry village entirely and taken work wherever she could find it, staying nowhere long enough for anyone to decide they had authority over her or her son. The human wardens had found her in a mill town the winter Ruvan was 6 months old. They wore the parish badges and carried the writs that said they spoke for the law, and they told her that a child without a father on the rolls was a masterless ward and could be bound out for his own good. They had not expected her to run. She had gotten 3 miles in the snow before they caught her, and when they brought her back to the mill, the foreman had vouched for her and paid the parish fine himself, though she never knew why. She paid him back over 4 months and left the day the debt was clear, because a man who did you a favor expected something eventually, and she would not owe that kind of debt to anyone. So she worked the hops in the autumn and the orchards in the spring and took whatever winter work she could find. And she carried Ruvan on her back because there was no one else to carry him. He was 2 years old now, old enough to walk but too young to keep up during the long days in the fields. And so he rode in the leather sling she had made from an old harness and slept when he was tired and cried when he was not. Today he had cried for an hour straight, the kind of furious wailing that came from teething or hunger or simply being too and tired of the world. She had given him a crust of bread soaked in water and a strip of dried apple, but he had thrown both on the ground and screamed louder, and every picker in the row had carefully looked anywhere but at her. The overseer had walked past twice, his mouth tight with disapproval, but he had not told her to leave, and so she kept working. The Markham hop yard paid better than most, and the work ran through the first frost, and she needed every penny if she wanted to keep a roof over their heads through the winter. She had her eye on a lambing job in the hill country that would take her through to spring, but the shepherd would only hire someone who came with references, and references meant staying in one place long enough to earn them. The sun was directly overhead when the dinner bell rang, a flat clang that sent the pickers toward the long tables set up under the ash trees at the edge of the garden. Erya waited until the rows had cleared before she moved. She did not eat with the others if she could help it. There were always questions, and questions led to conversations, and conversations led to people thinking they knew you well enough to offer advice or pity or worse. She found a spot in the shade of the kiln shed, slipped the sling off her shoulders, and settled Ruvan on the ground beside her. He was deeply asleep now, his round face soft and peaceful, his small tusks barely visible beneath his upper lip. He had his father's nose and her pointed ears, and his skin was the same deep green as hers, though his would darken as he grew. She unwrapped the bread and cheese she had brought and ate slowly, watching the crew at the tables. They were a mixed lot, as hop pickers always were. Families working together, single men looking for casual wages, a few older women who followed the harvest work year after year. She recognized some from other yards, others were new. There was a young human couple with a baby, the wife nursing under a shawl while her husband fetched her water, an old man with gnarled hands who worked slower than everyone else but never stopped. A trio of teenage boys who spent more time shoving each other than picking. None of them looked her way. The farmer who ran the kilns walked past the tables and stopped to speak to the overseer. Erya had noticed him before, though she had not learned his name. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders and thick in the arms, with a weathered face that suggested he was somewhere past 40. He did not talk much. She had heard him give instructions to the kiln workers in short, blunt sentences, and she had seen him move sacks of hops that should have taken 2 men. But he did not join the pickers for meals, and he did not socialize with the overseer's crew. He lived in the stone house beyond the kilns, and he worked from before dawn until after dark, and that was all she knew. He was looking at the kiln shed now, and Erya realized with a cold start that he was looking at her. She met his gaze for a moment, her hand moving instinctively to rest on Ruvan's back, and then he turned away and said something to the overseer that made the man shrug. The farmer walked toward the shed. Erya tensed, ready to pick up her son and move if she had to, but the man stopped a few feet away and nodded at the sacks stacked against the wall. "You are in the shade," he said. His voice was deep and rough, like gravel underfoot. "I did not think it would trouble anyone," Erya said carefully. "It does not." He glanced at Ruvan, then back at her. "The boy was crying this morning. He is quiet now." Teething, the question surprised her. "I think so, or tired. He does not like the sling when the day is hot." The farmer nodded slowly, as though this confirmed something he had already suspected. "There is a crate in the kiln house, slatted wood about yay big." He held his hands apart to show the size. "I use it for storing hops, but it is clean. If you put a blanket in it, the boy could sleep there instead of on the ground, cooler, and the slats let the air through." Erya stared at him. "Why would you give me a crate?" "I am not giving it to you. I am lending it. You can bring it back when the season ends." He turned and walked toward the kiln house before she could answer, disappearing through the wide door. She sat very still, trying to understand what had just happened. Men did not lend her things. Men did not notice when her son was uncomfortable. Men did not speak to her unless they wanted something, and even then they usually sent a woman to ask first. She waited for the trick to reveal itself, but the farmer did not come back, and the dinner bell rang again, and the pickers returned to the rows. Erya picked up Ruvan, slung him onto her back, and went back to work. The afternoon was hotter than the morning, and the baby woke after an hour and fussed, until she gave him more bread. He chewed it wetly, drooling onto her shoulder, and then fell asleep again with his sticky hands tangled in her hair. She finished her row and started another, and when the overseer came by to check the sacks, she had already filled 3 and started a 4th. "You work fast for someone carrying a child," the overseer said. He was a thin man with a narrow face and quick eyes that never seemed to settle on anything for long. I work as fast as I need to, Erya said. See that you do. We have standards here. He moved on without waiting for a response. The sun was low in the sky when the final bell rang, and the pickers began to drift toward the camp at the edge of the yard. Erya waited again, letting the crowd thin, and then walked toward the kiln house. The big door was open, and she could see the glow of the drying fires inside, the air shimmering with heat. The farmer was standing beside one of the kilns, a long rake in his hands, spreading the hops evenly across the drying floor. He saw her and set the rake aside, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Wait here," he said, and vanished into the back of the building. He returned a moment later carrying a wooden crate, just as he had described. It was well made, the slats smooth and evenly spaced, and it smelled faintly of the hop flowers that had been stored in it. He set it down in front of her. "Bring it back at the end of the season," he said again, and went back to his work. Erya picked up the crate and carried it back to the camp. The pickers had set up their tents and shelters in a loose circle around a central fire, and she had claimed a spot on the outer edge where she could come and go without walking through the middle of everything. Her own shelter was barely more than a canvas sheet stretched over a low frame, but it kept the rain off, and that was enough. She set the crate down inside, lined it with the spare blanket she used as a pillow, and laid Ruvan in it. He stirred but did not wake, and she sat back on her heels and looked at him. The crate was better than the ground. It kept him off the damp earth, and the slats would let the air move around him on hot nights. It was a practical solution to a practical problem, and the farmer had offered it in the same way he might loan a tool to another worker. There was no sentiment in it, no expectation. Just a crate, given because it made sense. She did not know what to do with that. The next morning, Ruvan woke cheerful and babbling, and Erya brought the crate to the edge of the hop garden and set it in the shade of a tall hedgerow. She put him in it with a few wooden spoons to play with and a cup of water, and he sat contentedly gumming the spoons while she worked the row nearest to him. The other pickers noticed, though no one said anything. The overseer walked past and frowned at the crate but did not tell her to move it. The farmer did not appear at all. The work went faster when she did not have to carry Ruvan on her back. She finished 5 sacks by midday and started a 6th, and when the dinner bell rang, she ate her bread sitting beside the crate while Ruvan napped. The young human woman with the baby stopped on her way back to the tables and looked down at the crate with obvious curiosity. "That is clever," she said. "Where did you get it?" "The farmer lent it to me," Erya said. The woman's eyebrows rose. "Marten Oakes, he does not usually lend things." So that was his name. He said the boy could use it for the season. Well, the woman looked like she wanted to say more, but her husband called to her from the tables and she hurried away. Marten. Erya turned the name over in her mind while she worked. It suited him, plain and solid. She had known a Marten once, a quarryman who worked beside Gorvac, but that man had been small and wiry, nothing like the farmer. This Marten was built like a stone wall, wide and sturdy and immovable. She wondered if he had always been a farmer or if he had come to it later, the way she had come to hop picking. She wondered if he had a wife, though she had not seen one. She wondered why he had noticed Ruvan crying when 40 other people had pretended not to hear. Then she stopped wondering, because wondering led to expecting and expecting led to disappointment, and she had learned that lesson too. The days fell into a rhythm. Erya worked the rows with Ruvan in his crate nearby, and the baby grew used to the routine and fussed less. The weather stayed clear and hot, perfect for the hops, and the overseer pushed the crew to finish the yard before the autumn rains came. Marten worked the kilns from dawn to dusk, and sometimes Erya saw him watching the pickers from the door of the kiln house, though he never came closer. Once he brought a canvas sheet and draped it over the crate to make a sunshade, leaving it without a word while she was working 3 rows over. Once he left a small, carved wooden bird beside the crate, the kind of toy a man might whittle in the evening to keep his hands busy. Ruvan loved it and carried it everywhere, chewing the wings until they were slick with spit. Erya did not thank him. She did not know how to thank him without acknowledging the strangeness of what he was doing, and she was not ready to do that yet. So she nodded when she saw him, and she took care of the crate and the canvas and the toy, and she tried not to think about what it meant that a man she did not know was doing small, quiet kindnesses for her son. The sickness came in the 3rd week of September, creeping through the pickers' camp like fog. It started with one of the teenage boys, who woke with a fever and a cough that sounded like it came from the bottom of a well. By the next morning 2 more were sick, and by the end of the week, half the camp was coughing and shivering. The overseer sent for the village healer, but she was 3 villages away tending a difficult birth and could not come. He sent for the farrier, who sometimes set bones and pulled teeth, but the farrier took one look at the sick pickers and said it was beyond him. "You need a proper healer," he said. "The woman in Ashford is the nearest, 11 miles east in the old mill house." 11 miles, the overseer said. "Who is going to ride 11 miles for a bunch of hop pickers?" No one answered. The crew had 2 horses between them, both plow animals too slow and too heavy to make the trip in less than half a day. The overseer had his own mount, but he was not about to ride through the night for the sake of casual workers he would never see again after the harvest. Erya listened to this conversation from the edge of the camp, Ruvan on her hip. The boy had not gotten sick yet, but it was only a matter of time. The fever was spreading fast, and children always caught it worst. She thought of the healer in Ashford, 11 miles away. She thought of the road, which she had traveled before and knew was decent enough for a fast horse. She thought of the horse she did not have. Then she thought of Marten, and the stone house beyond the kilns, and the fact that a man who ran a hop yard almost certainly kept a horse for traveling to market. She put Ruvan in his crate, made sure he was asleep, and walked to the kiln house. Marten was inside, checking the temperature of the drying fires. He looked up when she came in, his face streaked with soot. "The camp is sick," Erya said without preamble. "Half the crew has the fever. The overseer sent for the healer, but she is in Ashford, 11 miles from here." Marten straightened, his expression sharpening. "How bad?" "Bad enough that the farrier would not touch it. They need a proper healer, and they need her tonight, or we will be burying people by morning." He studied her for a moment, and she could see him weighing the situation, calculating distances and risks. "You want to borrow a horse?" "I want to borrow your fastest horse if you have one. I can ride well enough to get there and back before dawn. You know the road." "I have traveled it before." He nodded once, a sharp jerk of his chin. "Come with me." She followed him out of the kiln house and across the yard to the stone house. It was larger than she had expected, 2 stories with a slate roof and narrow windows, and it looked like it had been standing for 100 years. Marten led her around the back to a small stable, where 3 horses stood in loose boxes. One was a heavy draft animal, one was an older mare, and the third was a young gelding with a bright eye and clean legs. "Take the gelding," Marten said. "His name is Bracken. He is fast and he does not spook. There is a saddle on the wall." Erya lifted the saddle down and began to tack the horse, moving with the quick efficiency of someone who had done it 1,000 times. Marten watched her, his arms folded across his chest. "The road forks 3 miles out," he said. "Take the left fork. Ashford is straight on from there. The mill house is on the north side of the village beside the river. You cannot miss it. I know the place." "Good." He paused, then added, "If the healer will not come, offer her this." He pulled a small leather pouch from his belt and handed it to her. It was heavy with coins. Erya stared at the pouch. "I cannot take your money." "You are not taking it. You are borrowing it the same way you are borrowing the horse. Bring it back when you bring the healer." She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. There was no time to argue. She tucked the pouch into her belt, checked the girth, and swung into the saddle. Bracken shifted beneath her, eager to move. "Thank you," she said, and the words felt strange in her mouth, unfamiliar and awkward. Marten nodded. "Ride safe." She turned the gelding toward the road and kicked him into a canter. And the last thing she saw before the trees closed in was Marten standing in the doorway of the stable, watching her go. The road was dark, and the moon was only a sliver, but Bracken had good feet and a steady gait, and Erya let him find his own pace. The night air was cool and damp, smelling of earth and wood smoke, and the only sounds were the horses' hooves on the packed dirt and the occasional call of an owl. She rode hard, leaning low over Bracken's neck, and tried not to think about Ruvan sleeping in his crate or the fever spreading through the camp, or the fact that she had just left her son in the care of no one at all. Except that was not quite true. She had left him in the camp, yes, but the camp was beside the kiln house, and Marten was in the kiln house, and somehow she knew without being able to explain it that if Ruvan woke and cried, Marten would hear him. That thought should have terrified her. She had spent 2 years making sure no one had any claim on her son, no reason to think they had a right to him or a say in his life. She had run from Gorvak's brothers and the parish wardens and anyone else who looked at Ruvan and saw something they could take. And now she had left him with a man she barely knew, a human man who owed her nothing, and she was riding through the night on his horse with his money in her belt, and she was not afraid. She should have been afraid. She did not understand why she was not. The fork in the road appeared just where Marten had said it would, and she took the left branch without slowing. The miles fell away beneath Bracken's hooves, and by the time the first lights of Ashford appeared in the distance, the sky was beginning to pale in the east. The village was small, just a cluster of houses around a mill pond, and the mill house was easy to spot, a long, low building with smoke rising from the chimney. Erya dismounted and pounded on the door. A woman answered, middle-aged and sharp-eyed, with her sleeves rolled to the elbows and a faint smell of herbs clinging to her. "I need a healer," Erya said. "There is fever in the hop pickers' camp at Markham Yard. Half the crew is sick and it is getting worse." The woman looked her up and down, taking in the green skin and the tusks and the desperation. "Markham Yard is 11 miles from here. I know. I rode through the night to fetch you. I have patients here. And there will be patients there if you do not come. Children, old people. They will die if you do not help them." Erya pulled out the pouch of coins. "I can pay." The healer's expression did not change, but something shifted behind her eyes. "Keep your money. I will come because it is my job to come, not because you can pay. Give me 10 minutes to pack my bag." She was as good as her word. 10 minutes later she emerged with a leather satchel and a heavy cloak, and she climbed onto the back of Bracken without complaint. Erya swung up in front of her and turned the gelding back toward the road. "Hold on," she said, and kicked Bracken into a gallop. The ride back was faster than the ride out, and the sun was fully up by the time they reached the hop yard. The camp was quiet, the kind of quiet that came from sickness and exhaustion, and Erya could see people huddled in their tents or sitting by the cold fire. She rode straight to the kiln house and dismounted, helping the healer down. "The worst cases are in the big tent by the fire," she said. "The overseer can tell you who else needs seeing." The healer nodded and walked toward the camp, her back straight and her step brisk. Erya led Bracken to the stable, untacked him, and rubbed him down with a handful of straw. Her hands were shaking from exhaustion and the aftermath of fear, and she had to stop twice to steady herself. When she finally walked back to the camp, the sun was fully up and the kiln fires were already burning. She found Ruvan exactly where she had left him, asleep in his crate under the canvas shade. But there was a blanket tucked around him that she did not recognize and a cup of milk sitting beside the crate, still cool. Marten was standing beside the kiln house, watching the camp. When he saw her, he walked over. "The healer," he asked. "She is here. She is seeing the worst cases now." "Good." He looked down at Ruvan, then back at her. "The boy woke once about an hour ago. I gave him some milk and he went back to sleep." Erya felt something crack open in her chest, a sharp, painful thing that she did not have a name for. "You did not have to do that. I know." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the leather pouch, heavier now than when she had taken it. "The healer would not take payment, so I am giving this to you. Use it to buy winter food for the boy, or save it, or do whatever you need to do. Consider it wages for the ride." "I cannot take your money," Erya said, but her voice was weak. "You can and you will, because I am not arguing about it." He pressed the pouch into her hand and closed her fingers around it. His hands were rough and warm, and he did not let go immediately. "You rode 11 miles through the night to save a camp full of people who would not give you the time of day. You left your son in the care of a man you do not know and trusted that he would be safe. That takes more courage than most people have. Take the money." He let go and walked back to the kiln house before she could answer. Erya stood there holding the pouch, feeling the weight of it in her hand, and for the first time in 2 years, she allowed herself to think that maybe, just maybe, not all men were the same. The fever burned through the camp for another week, but the healer's medicines kept it from spreading further, and no one died. The sickest pickers recovered slowly, coughing and weak, and the overseer pushed back the end of the season to give them time to finish the harvest. Erya worked her rows with Ruvan in his crate, and every evening she saw Marten at the kiln house, raking hops or checking the fires. He did not speak to her again, and she did not speak to him, but something had changed between them, a small shift that she felt every time she saw him. She caught herself watching him sometimes when she thought he would not notice. The way he moved, deliberate and economical, wasting no energy. The way he spoke to the kiln workers, blunt and fair. The way he looked at Ruvan when he thought she was not watching, a faint softness in his weathered face that vanished as soon as he noticed her looking back. The other pickers noticed too. The young woman with the baby asked her once if Marten was her man, and Erya said no so sharply that the woman did not ask again. But the question lingered, turning over in her mind like a stone in a creek. He was not her man. She did not have a man, and she did not want one. Men were trouble, and trust was dangerous, and she had learned to survive without either. Gorvak had been different, or she had thought he was, but Gorvak was dead and his brothers had proven what family loyalty was worth. She would not make that mistake again. Except Marten was not asking for her trust. He was not asking for anything. He lent her a crate and a horse and paid her for a ride she would have made anyway, and he held her son when the boy cried, and he did it all without expecting anything in return. That was what frightened her. She knew how to deal with men who wanted something. She did not know how to deal with a man who simply helped because it needed doing. The harvest ended on the last day of September, and the overseer paid out the final wages in the yard. Erya had earned more than she expected, thanks to the extra days and the coins Marten had given her, and she counted it twice to be sure. It was enough for winter food and a little left over, maybe enough to pay for a room instead of sleeping in barns. She tucked the money into the pouch she kept inside her shirt and went to fetch Ruvan from his crate. The camp was breaking up. pickers loading their wagons and saying their goodbyes. Erya did not say goodbye to anyone. She pulled down her canvas shelter, rolled it into a tight bundle, and tied it to her pack. Then she picked up the crate and carried it to the kiln house. Marten was inside, banking the fires for the season. He looked up when she came in, and his gaze went to the crate in her hands. "Season is over," Erya said. "I am returning this as I said I would. You are leaving then, I am. There is work in the hill country lambing season. I am going to try for it." He nodded slowly. "The hill country is cold in the winter. Make sure you have warm clothes for the boy." "I will." They stood there in silence, and Erya felt the weight of all the things she did not know how to say. "Think you seem too small. I trust you seem too dangerous. I do not understand, you seem too honest. You are a good man," she said finally, and the words came out awkward and stiff. Marten looked at her for a long moment, and something flickered in his eyes, gone too fast to read. "So are you. A good woman, I mean," she almost smiled. "Thank you for the crate and the horse and the rest. You are welcome." He paused, then added, "If the lambing work does not come through, there is always work here in the spring. Planting season. The pay is decent and the housing is better than a tent." Erya did not know what to say to that, so she nodded and turned to leave. She made it to the door before his voice stopped her. "Erya," she turned back. "If you ever need help," Marten said, "you know where to find me." She nodded again, not trusting her voice, and walked out into the autumn sunlight. The hill country work did not come through. The shepherd had hired someone else by the time Erya arrived, someone with references and a husband and no small children in tow. She found other work, a week here and a week there, enough to keep them fed but not enough to save. Winter came hard and cold, and she spent most of it in a boarding house in a border town, sharing a room with 3 other women and their children, trying to make her money last until spring. Ruvan grew fast, losing the baby roundness in his face and learning to walk with the lurching determination of all toddlers. He learned words, simple ones at first, then more, and he learned to call her mama and to point at things he wanted and to laugh when she tickled him. He was a bright, curious child, quick to smile and slow to cry, and Erya loved him with a fierceness that sometimes frightened her. She thought about Marten more than she wanted to admit. She thought about his offer of spring work, and the stone house, and the way he had held Ruvan that night when she rode to Ashford. She thought about trust and what it cost and whether she could afford it. In the end, it was not about affording it. It was about needing it. By the time the snow melted and the roads cleared, Erya had 2 copper coins left and no prospects. She packed her things, settled Ruvan on her hip, and walked the 11 miles to Markham Hop Yard. The yard looked different in the spring, the vines still bare and the kilns cold. But the stone house was the same, smoke rising from the chimney, and when she knocked on the door, Marten answered. He looked older in the daylight, or maybe just tired, but his eyes were the same, steady and calm. "I came to ask about the spring work," Erya said. "If the offer is still open." Marten stepped back and held the door wider. "It is. Come in." The house was warm and clean, with plain furniture and a stone hearth and a kitchen that smelled of bread. Marten poured her a cup of cider and gave Ruvan a piece of honeycomb, and they sat at the long table while he explained the work. "Planting starts in a week," he said. "Hops, barley, some vegetables. I need someone to help with the field work and the weeding and later with the harvest. The pay is $1 a week plus room and board. There is a cottage at the edge of the yard, 2 rooms and a hearth. It needs some repair, but it is livable." "I can do repairs," Erya said. "I know." He looked at her, then at Ruvan, who was sticky with honey and grinning. "The boy can stay with you during the day. When he is older, he can help with light work. I will not ask you to leave him with anyone." Erya felt that crack in her chest again, the one that had opened the night she rode to Ashford. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I need the help and you need the work. It is as simple as that." "It is not that simple." "No," Marten said quietly, "it is not, but it is true enough." She looked at him, this big, gruff, quiet man who had lent her a crate and a horse and now a cottage, and she made a decision that terrified and relieved her in equal measure. "I will take the work," she said. "Good." He stood and gestured toward the door. "I will show you the cottage." The cottage was small and drafty, with a sagging roof and a door that did not quite close, but it had a hearth and a window and 2 rooms, which was more than Erya had hoped for. She spent the first week patching the roof and hanging a new door, working in the evenings after the fieldwork was done. Marten helped without being asked, holding boards while she hammered and fetching tools from his own workshop. They worked in companionable silence, and Erya found herself relaxing in a way she had not relaxed in years. Ruvan loved the cottage. He loved the big yard and the stable and the chickens that scratched in the dirt behind the house. He loved following Marten around, toddling after him while Marten did his chores, and Marten bore it with the same patience he brought to everything else. Once Erya found them in the barn, Ruvan sitting on a hay bale while Marten showed him how to oil a harness, and the sight of it made her throat tight. The spring work was hard but steady, and Erya fell into the rhythm of it. Planting, weeding, hauling water, mending fences. Marten worked beside her most days, teaching her the things she did not know and trusting her with the things she did. He did not talk much, but when he did, his words were deliberate and careful, and Erya learned to listen for the things he did not say as much as the things he did. They were in the field one afternoon, planting barley, when Ruvan fell asleep under the shade of an oak tree. Erya straightened and pressed her hands to her aching back, watching her son's small chest rise and fall. "He is a good boy," Marten said, following her gaze. "He is. He has his father's stubbornness, and his mother's courage." Erya looked at him, surprised. "I am not courageous. You rode 11 miles in the dark to save people who would not have done the same for you. You raised a child alone in a world that did not want either of you. You left everything familiar to keep him safe. If that is not courage, I do not know what is." She did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They went back to planting, and the moment passed, but the words stayed with her. Summer came, and with it the bustle of the growing season. The hops climbed their poles, the barley turned gold, and Ruvan learned to run, racing through the rows with his arms outstretched like wings. Erya worked from dawn to dusk, and for the first time in years, she felt something like contentment. The work was hard, but it was hers. The cottage was small, but it was safe, and Marten was there, steady and quiet and always willing to help, asking for nothing but her presence. She still did not know what to make of him. He did not court her the way men courted women in the villages, with flowers and compliments and stolen glances. He did not touch her, unless it was to hand her a tool or steady her when she stumbled. He did not speak of affection or desire, and he did not ask her to stay beyond the season. But he fixed the latch on her door when it broke, and he taught Ruvan to whittle, and he always made sure there was enough firewood stacked beside her hearth. It was enough, and it was not enough, and Erya did not know which feeling to trust. The trouble came in late summer, on a hot afternoon when the air was thick and still. Erya was in the garden, pulling weeds when a man rode into the yard. He wore the badge of a parish overseer, and he had the look of someone who took himself very seriously. He dismounted and walked toward the house, and Marten came out to meet him. "Can I help you?" Marten asked. "I am looking for an Orc woman and her child," the overseer said. "I was told they might be working here." Erya stood up slowly, her heart pounding. She knew that tone. She had heard it before from the wardens who tried to take Ruvan. "I am here," she said, stepping into view. Ruvan was behind her, playing with a wooden horse. The overseer looked her up and down with the kind of disdain that made her skin prickle. "Your name?" "Erya Oakes." "And the child?" "Ruvan. My son." "Your son?" The overseer pulled a folded paper from his coat. "I have received a complaint that the child is being raised without proper supervision. As a masterless ward, he falls under the jurisdiction of the parish, and I am here to assess whether he should be removed and placed in a household that can provide appropriate care." The world tilted. Erya felt her hands curl into fists, her breath coming fast and shallow. "He is my son. I am raising him. He is not masterless. You are unmarried. The father is deceased. There is no man on the parish rolls claiming responsibility for the child. That makes him a ward of the parish." "He is my son," Erya repeated, louder this time. "You have no right to take him." "I have every right." The overseer unfolded the paper and held it up. "This writ gives me the authority to assess the child's situation and remove him if I deem it necessary for his welfare." Marten stepped forward, his broad frame blocking the overseer's path. "Who filed the complaint?" The overseer hesitated, then said, "That is confidential." "It is not confidential if you are using it to justify taking a child from his mother." "Who filed it?" The overseer's mouth tightened. "A concerned citizen who observed the child living in inadequate conditions." "What inadequate conditions?" Marten's voice was flat and hard, the tone of a man who had run out of patience. "The boy lives in a cottage with his mother. He is fed, clothed, and cared for. He is healthy and happy. What exactly is inadequate about that?" "He is being raised by an orc woman without a husband. That alone is cause for concern." "Is it against the law for an orc woman to raise her own child?" "It is not against the law, but it is within my authority to determine whether the situation is in the child's best interest." "And you have determined this based on what?" "A complaint from someone you will not name, who likely has never met the child or spoken to his mother." Marten took another step forward, and the overseer took a step back. "Let me tell you what I see. I see a woman who works harder than anyone I have ever met. I see a child who is loved and cared for, and I see a man with a writ he does not have the sense to use properly." "You have no authority here," the overseer snapped. "I have the authority that comes with owning this land and employing this woman. If you want to take her child, you will have to go through the parish sessions and present your case to a magistrate. Until then, get off my property." The overseer's face turned red. "This is not over." "No," Marten said quietly, "it is not, but you are done here for today." The overseer remounted his horse and rode off, and Erya sank to her knees in the dirt, shaking. Marten crouched beside her, his hand hovering near her shoulder but not quite touching. "He will come back," Erya said. Her voice was thin and brittle. "He will come back with more men, and they will take Ruvan, and I will not be able to stop them." "He will not take Ruvan," Marten said. "How can you know that?" "Because I will not let him." Marten's voice was steady, certain. "Listen to me." The overseer is posturing. He does not have the authority to take a child without a hearing, and he knows it. He was hoping you would not know it. But now he has to go through the proper channels, and that gives us time. Time for what? Time to make sure he cannot win. Marten stood and offered her his hand. "Come inside. We need to talk." Inside the stone house, Marten poured her a cup of water and made her sit down. Ruvan climbed into her lap, sensing her distress, and she held him tightly. "The overseer will take this to the parish sessions," Marten said. "He will argue that Ruvan is a masterless ward and should be placed in a household. We need to prove that he is not masterless, that he has a home and a family and people who will speak for him. I am his mother. That should be enough. It should be." But the law does not always see things the way it should. Marten sat down across from her, his hands flat on the table. There is a way to make sure the overseer cannot touch him. It is not simple, and it is not what you want to hear, but it is the only way I can see. What is it? Marry me. Erya stared at him. What? Marry me, Marten repeated. If we are married, Ruvan is no longer fatherless. He has a family on the parish rolls. He has a home and a man claiming responsibility for him. The overseer has no case. You cannot be serious. I am completely serious. You do not love me. You barely know me. I know you well enough. Marten's gaze was steady, unflinching. I know you are a good mother. I know you work hard and you do not give up. I know you love your son more than anything in the world. That is enough for me. But I do not love you, Erya said, and the words felt like a betrayal even though they were true. I know. Marten's voice was calm, matter of fact. I am not asking you to love me. I am asking you to marry me so the overseer cannot take your son. If that is all it ever is, then that is enough. Erya felt tears prick her eyes, hot and stinging. Why would you do this? Why would you tie yourself to me for the sake of a child who is not yours? Because it is the right thing to do. Marten reached across the table and covered her hand with his, warm and rough and solid. Because I have watched you fight for him every day since you came here, and I will not stand by and watch someone take him from you. And because, if I am honest, I would be proud to call him my son. The tears spilled over, and Erya could not stop them. She cried silently, holding Ruvan with one hand and gripping Marten's hand with the other, and he did not let go. I need time to think, she said finally. You have until the sessions. That is 3 weeks from now, 3 weeks. Yes, Erya nodded and wiped her eyes. I will think about it. But there was nothing to think about, not really. She could refuse Marten's offer and fight the overseer alone, but she had no money for a solicitor and no witnesses who would speak for an Orc woman against a parish official. She could run, but the overseer would follow, and running meant giving up the only stable home Ruvan had ever known. Or she could marry Marten, a man she respected but did not love, and give her son the protection of a name and a family. It was not a choice. It was survival, the same kind of survival she had practiced for 2 years. And so, 2 days later, she told Marten yes. They married in the village church on a rainy morning with the vicar and 2 witnesses who worked the neighboring farms. Erya wore a clean dress and Marten wore his Sunday coat, and Ruvan stood between them holding the wooden horse Marten had carved for him. The ceremony was short and plain, and when the vicar pronounced them man and wife, Marten kissed her cheek with a gentleness that made her chest ache. Afterward, they walked back to the stone house through the rain, and Marten made tea while Erya sat at the table and tried to understand what she had just done. She was married. She had a husband. Ruvan had a father, at least on paper. It should have felt like safety, but all she felt was numb. You can stay in the cottage if you prefer, Marten said, setting a cup in front of her. Or you can move into the house. Either way is fine. What do you want? Erya asked. I want you to be comfortable. That is not an answer. Marten sat down across from her, his expression thoughtful. I want you to feel like this is your home. I want Ruvan to feel safe. Beyond that, I do not have expectations. If you want your own space, take it. If you want to share the house, we will make it work. It is up to you. Erya looked at him, this man who had given her everything and asked for nothing, and felt something shift inside her. I will move into the house, she said. It makes more sense, and Ruvan should have a proper room, not just a corner of a cottage. All right. Marten nodded. I will help you move your things this afternoon. They moved her belongings after the rain stopped, carrying her few possessions across the yard to the stone house. Marten gave her the larger of the 2 bedrooms upstairs, the one with a window that looked out over the fields, and he set up a small bed for Ruvan in the corner. He took the smaller room for himself, across the hall, and did not comment on the arrangement. That night, Erya lay in the unfamiliar bed and listened to the sounds of the house settling around her. Ruvan was asleep beside her, his small body warm and relaxed, and downstairs she could hear Marten banking the fire. It was strange, living in a house with a man again. Strange and terrifying, and, in a way she did not want to examine too closely, comforting. The parish sessions were held in the village hall 3 weeks after the wedding. The overseer presented his case, arguing that Ruvan had been living in inadequate conditions and that his mother was unfit to raise him. He did not mention the marriage, which told Erya he did not know about it yet. Marten stood and addressed the magistrate, a white-haired man with sharp eyes and a reputation for fairness. "The boy is my stepson," Marten said. "His mother and I were married 3 weeks ago in this very village, with the vicar presiding. He has a home, a family, and 2 parents who care for him. The overseer's complaint is based on outdated information and should be dismissed." The overseer sputtered, his face turning red. "This is a sham marriage designed to circumvent the law." "Is it?" The magistrate looked at Marten. "Do you claim the boy as your son?" "I do." "And you, madam," the magistrate turned to Erya, "do you consent to this marriage and to your husband's claim on the child?" "I do," Erya said. The magistrate leaned back in his chair, studying them both. "I see no evidence of a sham. The marriage is legal, the claim is clear, and the child is well cared for. The complaint is dismissed." The overseer opened his mouth to argue, but the magistrate cut him off. "Furthermore, I am troubled by the fact that this complaint was brought without proper investigation. An overseer's duty is to protect children, not to harass families based on prejudice. I am recommending your removal from office, pending a review by the parish council." The overseer went pale. He tried to speak, but the magistrate waved him away, and the session was over. Erya walked out of the hall with Marten's hand on her back and Ruvan on her hip, and for the first time in years she felt something like hope. The autumn came, and with it the hop harvest. Erya worked the rows again, but this time she was not just a picker. She was the farmer's wife, and the other workers treated her differently, with a respect that was grudging but real. She did not know if it was because of Marten or because of the sessions or simply because she had proven she could do the work, but it did not matter. She had a place here, and so did Ruvan. Marten was the same as he had always been, steady and quiet and always willing to help. He did not treat her any differently as his wife than he had as his worker, except that he was more careful about asking her opinion on things and making sure she had what she needed. He did not touch her except in passing, and he did not come to her room at night, and Erya was grateful for that, even as a small, traitorous part of her wondered what it would be like if he did. She was in the garden one afternoon, harvesting the last of the squash, when Ruvan came running over with something clutched in his fist. "Mama, look," he said, opening his hand to show her a smooth black stone. "Marten gave it to me. He said it is for luck." Erya took the stone and turned it over in her fingers. It was polished and round, the kind of thing a person might carry in their pocket for years. "Did he say where he got it?" "He said his father gave it to him when he was little, and now he is giving it to me." Erya felt her throat tighten. She looked across the yard and saw Marten standing by the barn watching them. He raised a hand in a small wave, and she waved back. That night, after Ruvan was asleep, she went downstairs and found Marten sitting by the fire, mending a harness. She sat down in the chair across from him and he looked up. "Ruvan showed me the stone," she said. "I thought he might like it. It was your father's, it was. But my father is gone and I have no children of my own. It seemed right to give it to Ruvan. He is not your son. He is now." Marten set the harness aside and met her gaze. I claimed him at the sessions, and I meant it. He is my son in every way that matters." Erya looked at him, this man who had married her to save her child and who gave away his father's stone without hesitation, and felt the last of her defenses crumble. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why do you care so much?" Marten was quiet for a long moment, his gaze steady and unflinching. "Because I know what it is like to be alone," he said finally. "I lost my wife 10 years ago in childbirth. The baby did not survive either. I have been alone ever since, and I told myself I was fine with it, that I did not need anyone. But then you came here with your son, and you were so fierce and so determined, and I saw myself in you. I saw the loneliness and the fear and the refusal to give up. And I thought, if I could help you, if I could give you and Ruvan a safe place, then maybe I would not be so alone either." Erya felt tears well up in her eyes, and this time she did not try to stop them. "I did not know. I am sorry. Do not be sorry. You had no way of knowing, and I did not tell you because it was not relevant. But it is relevant now, because I want you to understand that this marriage is not just about protecting Ruvan. It is about building something together if you are willing." "I do not know how to do that," Erya said. "I do not know how to trust someone enough to build a life with them." "Neither do I," Marten said, "but we can learn together." She looked at him, and for the first time she allowed herself to see him not as a means of survival but as a man. A man who had lost everything and rebuilt his life with quiet determination. A man who had given her a home and a future without asking for anything in return. A man who looked at her son and saw not a burden but a gift. "I would like that," she said. Marten smiled, a rare, genuine smile that softened his weathered face. "So would I." They sat together by the fire, talking late into the night, and for the first time Erya felt the possibility of something more than survival. She felt the possibility of happiness. The winter was long and cold, but the stone house was warm, and Erya found herself settling into the rhythms of married life. She cooked and cleaned and mended, and Marten chopped wood and tended the animals and fixed the things that broke. They worked together in easy companionship, and slowly, carefully, they learned to talk to each other about things that mattered. Marten told her about his wife, a bright, laughing woman who had loved flowers and singing, and Erya told him about Gorvak, who had been strong and kind and foolish enough to think he could protect her from the world. They grieved together, and in grieving they began to heal. Ruvan grew taller and stronger, his vocabulary expanding daily. He called Marten Papa now, without prompting, and Marten's face lit up every time he said it. He taught Ruvan to feed the chickens and groom the horses and stack firewood, and Ruvan followed him everywhere, chattering endlessly about everything and nothing. One evening in late winter, Erya was washing dishes when Marten came up behind her and rested his hand on her shoulder. It was the first time he had touched her in months, and she froze. "I am sorry," he said, pulling his hand back. "I did not mean to startle you." "You did not startle me," Erya said. She turned to face him, drying her hands on her apron. "I am just not used to it, I know. But I want you to get used to it if you are willing." He reached out again, slower this time, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I care for you, Erya, not just as the mother of my son, but as my wife. I have cared for you for a long time, and I am tired of pretending I do not." Erya's breath caught. "I care for you too. I think I have for a while, but I did not know how to say it." "You just did," Marten said, and he kissed her, gentle and tentative and full of hope. It was not like kissing Gorvak, wild and desperate and full of youthful passion. It was something quieter, deeper, built on respect and trust, and the knowledge that they had both survived the worst the world could throw at them. It was a kiss that promised not perfection but partnership, not romance but steadiness. and it was enough. Spring came again, and with it, the planting season. Erya worked the fields beside Marten, and this time it felt different. This time it felt like home. The cottage at the edge of the yard stood empty now, and Marten talked about turning it into a workshop or a storage shed. Ruvan played in the dirt while they worked, building elaborate castles out of sticks and stones. And sometimes, Erya caught Marten watching him with an expression of such tenderness that it made her chest ache. The hop pickers came again in the autumn, and Erya recognized some of the faces from the year before. The young woman with the baby waved to her, and Erya waved back. The overseer was gone, replaced by a younger man who treated the pickers fairly and did not ask questions about anyone's status. The harvest was good, and Marten paid the crew generously, and when the season ended, Erya did not pack her things and leave. She stayed, because this was her home now, and these were her people. That winter, on a night when the snow was falling softly outside and the fire was crackling in the hearth, Marten asked her if she wanted more children. They were sitting together on the old sofa, Erya leaning against his shoulder, and the question surprised her. "I do not know," she said honestly. "I never thought I would have the chance." "Do you want more children?" "I think I do," Marten said. "I lost my chance once, and I did not think I would get it again. But now I have Ruvan and I have you, and I think it would be a good thing to have more, but only if you want it too." Erya thought about it, turning the idea over in her mind. A baby, another child, a family that was hers not by chance but by choice. "I think I want it too," she said. "Then we will see what happens," Marten said, and he kissed the top of her head. What happened was that by spring Erya was pregnant, and by autumn she gave birth to a daughter. The labor was hard but short, and the midwife from the village said she had never seen a healthier baby. They named her Nara, and she had Marten's gray eyes and Erya's green skin, and Ruvan was utterly enchanted with her. Marten held his daughter for the first time with tears streaming down his face, and Erya knew that he was thinking of the child he had lost all those years ago. But this was not that child. This was Nara, alive and squalling and perfect, and she was theirs. Life settled into a new rhythm after that. Erya worked when she could, carrying Nara in a sling the way she had once carried Ruvan. And Marten hired a girl from the village to help with the house and the children when the work got heavy. Ruvan started learning his letters from the vicar's wife, and Nara grew into a chubby, cheerful baby who smiled at everyone and slept through the night. The years passed, measured in harvests and birthdays and small, quiet joys. Ruvan grew into a sturdy boy with his father's strength and his mother's determination, and he worked beside Marten in the fields, learning the craft of farming. Nara grew into a bright, curious girl who asked endless questions and followed her brother everywhere. Marten's hair turned gray, and Erya's hands grew rough with work, and the stone house filled with the noise and chaos of a family. There were hard times, too. A bad harvest one year that left them scraping to make ends meet. A winter illness that laid all of them low for weeks. A fire in the barn that destroyed half the equipment and took months to rebuild. But they weathered it together, the way they weathered everything, with hard work and stubborn determination, and the knowledge that they were not alone. On Ruvan's 10th birthday, Marten took him to the village and had him added to the parish rolls under the name Erya Oakes, son of Marten and Erya. It was a small thing, a formality, but it meant the world to Erya. Her son had a name, a family, a place in the world that no one could take away. That night, after the children were asleep, Erya and Marten sat together by the fire as they always did. Marten was whittling a new toy for Nara, and Erya was mending a shirt, and the silence between them was comfortable and familiar. "You ever think about the day we met?" Erya asked. Marten looked up, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I think about it often. You were so fierce, standing there with your son on your back, daring anyone to say a word. I knew right then that you were someone special. I thought you were just another man who wanted something from me. And now I know you are the man who gave me everything," Erya said. "A home, a family, a future. I did not think I deserved any of that, but you gave it to me anyway." "You deserved it," Marten said firmly. "You have always deserved it. I am just glad I was the one who got to give it to you." Erya set down her mending and moved to sit beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I love you," she said, and the words came easily now, without fear or hesitation. "I love you too," Marten said, and he kissed her, slow and sweet and full of promise. The fire burned low, and the night grew quiet. And Erya thought about the girl she had been, alone and afraid and trusting no one. That girl was gone, replaced by a woman who had learned that trust was not weakness and love was not a trap. She had learned that there were men who kept their promises, and that family was not just blood but choice. She had learned that home was not a place, but the people you shared it with. And she had learned, most of all, that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was hand your sleeping baby to a quiet farmer and trust that he would keep him safe. Years later, when Ruvan was a young man and Nara was learning to manage the hop yard herself, Erya would sit on the porch of the stone house and watch the sun set over the fields. Marten would sit beside her, his hand warm in hers, and they would talk about the life they had built together. They would talk about the children, who were strong and kind and determined, and about the grandchildren they hoped to have someday. They would talk about the farm, which was thriving, and the village, which had grown to accept them. And sometimes, when the evening was quiet and the world felt small and safe, Erya would think about that moment in the hop garden when she had first handed Ruvan to Marten. It had been the middle of the night, and she had been terrified, and she had done it anyway because she had no other choice. But it had not been a choice born of desperation. It had been a choice born of something deeper, something she had not been ready to name at the time. It had been trust. And that trust had grown into love, and that love had grown into a family, and that family had grown into a life that was richer and fuller than anything she had ever imagined. She had been right to trust him. She had been right to stay. She had been right to let herself love him. And as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to appear, Erya leaned her head on Marten's shoulder and felt a peace so complete that it brought tears to her eyes. This was home. This was family. This was everything she had ever needed, wrapped up in one quiet, stubborn, endlessly patient man and the children they had raised together. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.